If you don't know me, I'm Stacey Mosley. My family and I have been members of Woodland Hills Community Church for about 10 years now. This is our church home. Some of my dearest friends are in this room, or are often in this room. My favorite people are here. I'm really grateful to be able to speak about something that's so important to me. And forgive me, I'm a little emotional today. This is when I look out and I see all the orange, it brings me joy. So another thing, I just want to preempt that I might be talking about some things that are a little scary or that can bring up emotional things like it does for me. And it can stir up some strong reactions in people. It's not uncommon for people to hear discussions about gun violence and realize that they're actually a survivor themselves. As gun violence impacts well over half the country in some way, and unfortunately that number just continues to grow. That being said, if you feel like this is too intense, if you have to step out, if this is not up your alley, I will not be offended in any way if you need to leave or if you need to turn off your Zoom. Also, if you do feel a reaction, realize that you may be a survivor and you want me to help get you in touch with our survivor network with Moms Demand Action, I'm here and will gladly be a support for you. So again, looking around the room and seeing all the orange and seeing the support that I have, I'm truly so grateful for the support that this church has given me with the work I do in gun violence prevention with Moms Demand Action. So Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that works to eliminate gun violence in all forms. That's suicide, homicide, mass shootings, daily gun violence, and armed extremism. We do that through legislation, we do that through education, by connecting with community partners that do violence interruption and violence prevention on the ground. If there's been a shooting in a community, they show up to hospitals and try to de-escalate. These are people that do the hard work, and we stand behind them and help fund them and support them in any way that we can. Well, I've been participating in social justice and activism for literally as long as I can remember. As a child and as a teen in New York, I started during the AIDS crisis. My voice teacher and mentor of 10 years got HIV and died of AIDS when I was 16. And of course, many people that I know and love died from AIDS in New York from the work that I was doing as an actor there. I came to the gun violence prevention movement work in earnest after the mass school shooting in Parkland in 2018. But of course, like everyone, and I think it was actually one of my first Sundays here, after Sandy Hook, my son was he was a year younger than the children that were impacted and the families that were impacted in Sandy Hook. And just a reminder, this year would be the year that these children would be graduating. Now, I don't consider myself a survivor, but I grew up in a family where gun violence touched many people that I love. My mom's a survivor. She witnessed a murder-suicide by gun as a child, then grew up to be a survivor of domestic violence where a gun was used to intimidate and coerce her. My sister is also a survivor of domestic violence and gun violence where a gun was used often. My mom also lost a nephew to gun violence in a hunting accident. Then she lost a cousin, her stepson, her cousin's stepson was 13 when he was shot in an unintentional shooting by his best friend. They thought the gun was unloaded. Like many volunteers in the gun violence prevention movement, especially moms, we come because we want to create a world that's safe for our kids. We see the mass shootings and it terrifies us. But once we start the work, as I did many years ago, we learn that while horrific, absolutely horrific, mass shootings are actually rare, and we can be grateful for that. They represent a small fraction of the deaths that come from guns in our country. So just a little technical stuff. Mass shootings are defined as 3 or 4 or more individuals that are shot in one incident. And that just sort of depends on the news source that you're getting it from or the organization that's reporting it. They are catastrophic to communities, truly. They send ripples of pain and trauma absolutely for decades through the families of those that were killed and the survivors, those that witnessed the event or that were injured. They get the news, they get the chaos, and then they often get the desertion after the event. Or unfortunately, like with Sandy Hook or Parkland, they get vile conspiracy theories too, that they actually didn't exist. And of course, the anniversaries. that no one wants to celebrate. These mass shootings in our country that make the headlines are often fueled by hate and extremism, as we saw in the Pulse nightclub shooting, the El Paso shooting at the Walmart, the Top shooting in Buffalo, and the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting, and many more. The toll that these take on communities is absolutely immeasurable, so my heart always goes out to them. But what doesn't get the same attention is the daily toll of gun violence in this country. As of today, we are over 120 daily deaths from gun violence, up from over 100 when I started my work with Moms Demand Action. A couple statistics that I think are very shocking, but I think everyone needs to hear this. We have 500 million guns circulating in our country. Let me say that again, 500 million guns circulating throughout this country. 60 million guns were purchased in 2020 to 2022 during COVID. And of course, a lot of those purchases were by people that were untrained, that had never owned a gun, didn't know how to store them correctly. So we saw a huge rise in shootings from domestic violence, from unintentional shooting by children, and suicide by kids and teens, unfortunately, during that time. Also, we were in a very stressful time, so access to a gun made it easy to make suicide happen. Gun violence is now the #1 killer of kids and teens in our country. And marginalized communities, primarily Black and brown communities, especially kids and teenagers, women, members of the LGBTQ+ community, primarily trans women and trans Black women, are all more likely to be a victim of gun violence in our country. So why we're orange? Seems sort of strange, right? It's a bright, happy color. Well, actually, next Friday, June 7th, is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and we honor it throughout the month. It started when Hadia Pendleton, a young woman, marched in President Obama's second inaugural parade. 1 week later, she went home, and she was shot and killed on a playground in Chicago. So her friends, after this tragedy, started honoring her by wearing orange. It's also the color that hunters use when they're in the woods to say, "Don't shoot." So Wear Orange is now observed every June. Thousands of people across the country, like thousands, if you look at social media, it's pretty amazing, wear the color orange to honor Hadia and the more than 43,000 Americans that are killed every year in our country, and the almost 80,000 that are injured or wounded from guns. Now, normally we would have this event next weekend, but next Sunday, 1,000 volunteers, including myself from Moms Demand Action, from Students Demand Action, and Everytown, our umbrella organization, are actually getting on planes and heading to DC. And we'll be doing several days of training, and our first day, and I'm really excited about this, of national advocacy on Capitol Hill. We will be meeting with legislators, the ones that support us and the ones that don't, to try to impart on them the desperation of our country to create more national legislation to end gun violence. So instead, we're honoring it today. Today is actually, I just read this morning, is Hadia Pendleton's birthday. So why a drive for domestic violence shelter, right? Well, I know from my own experience, domestic violence and gun violence go hand in hand. Honestly, 2/3 of women killed by an intimate partner are killed by a gun. Existing loopholes throughout the country on federal and state levels allow access to guns by abusive partners and stalkers, and almost always with deadly results. So the evidence is clear. Common sense gun laws that keep guns out of the hands of abusive partners reduce gun violence and domestic violence. Why a food pantry? Well, people in crisis are much more likely to attempt suicide. Suicide by gun accounts for 54% of gun deaths in our country, even though firearms are used in just 5% of suicide attempts. Things seem bleak. It is bleak. It's a very hard thing to do to work in gun violence prevention. But I will tell you that there is some good news. California leads the country in gun safety laws. And because of that, we also have one of the lowest per capita gun death rates in the country. Gun laws work. There is no question. After Uvalde, which was devastating, we passed our first federal bipartisan gun safety law in decades. It didn't go far enough, no question. That's why we're going to DC next week. But it is something. And yes, extremism is alive and well, and armed extremism is happening everywhere. There are churches where you walk in and it says gods and guns. And yes. And so as a church, a progressive church, it is our duty to look at this, to understand gun violence, and what our purpose is as people of faith in fighting the gun violence epidemic. So how can you help? Well, you can take action by joining Moms Demand. Outside, we have a lot of information that you can, doesn't mean that you have to come to meetings, doesn't mean you have to wear the shirts and do all the hours of work. You can literally text some things for me, and that's what we need. You can also, there's other groups like Brady and Giffords. They help move legislation forward to help reduce gun violence and support these community violence intervention programs. You can also, in your own circles, gun violence restraining orders. If you know someone that owns a gun and seems to be a risk to themselves or someone else, there, through due process, you can reach out to law enforcement and have that gun removed from their home. If you have a gun, lock it up. Guns are stolen from cars daily. That is where they end up in homicide situations and in crimes. Suicide by gun often happens because someone has access to a gun on their very worst day. And kids are curious. You may talk to them all the time about how dangerous guns are and how they can't touch them. And you may say, oh, it's well hidden. They know exactly where that gun is. Trust me. And finally, vote. I know I'm not supposed to talk about this in church, but it is vital. Voting for candidates that support gun safety legislation, that understand the massive health crisis that is happening in our country right now, and supporting organizations like mine and people like me. So thank you so much. I appreciate you all. We have some refreshments after church and some information and some fun things too, because, you know, we have to celebrate the wins occasionally. So thank you for your time.